It's been a few weeks since the Edge of Fate launch, and even though I like the story, the raid is cool, the power grind is definitely rough, and even though I wanted to wait to get my power a little bit higher before I started making builds, I need to start making them. So the first three I'm going to focus on is the new exotic, specifically with this video, the Eunoia Exotic gauntlets for the Warlock. Even though it's not the best exotic for PvE, the passive benefits are really good, especially if you are a new player or someone who's getting into it, considering the amount of ability kills and also passive DPS you can do. There are two ways to get the new exotic armor pieces. The first way is just by doing the campaign on Legendary, which honestly really wasn't that bad in my opinion, and the second way is by completing Sieve. It does have a random chance to drop. For Eunoia's perk, Console's Pitch, Hellion projectiles deal increased damage the further they travel, eventually fracturing into scorching shrapnel. If you're not familiar with Hellion, it's a solar aspect on both the solar and prismatic subclasses. Essentially, once you activate your class ability, it summons that little solar mortar buddy and it just lobs it at enemies, scorching them, eventually being able to cause an ignition. As an example, we're here in the shooting range, I'm going to activate my class ability and it will automatically attack those targets. Now, the further away it gets, as you can see, the projectiles start fracturing off. As you can see, when I'm up close, it takes 3 Hellion shots to proc an ignition, but if I'm farther away and I let those projectiles branch out and go back to the target, it can take 2, maybe like 2.5, depending on how many projectiles hit. Sometimes the tracking is a little off, but essentially, if you are farther away from a boss, for example, you can potentially get more ignitions in for some passive damage. Like I mentioned, I have 2 different setups for Eunoia, the first one being Solar Warlock, which everyone has access to, and the second one being Prismatic. Both are going to have different weapons, artifact perks, and armor mods, so I'm going to cover each separately, first starting with the Solar Warlock. Under the Solar subclass for supers, either Well of Radiance, which again is going to be great for survivability, or Song of Flame, which again is kind of the mix between survivability and also some passive damage. Plus, your solar and kinetic weapons will also scorch targets, which means you can build up that ignition faster, especially with the passive Hellion. For our abilities, under class ability, I like Phoenix Dive because it does cure me and the teammates, but you could do Healing Rift if you would like. For movement, I like Burst Glide. Again, you can use anyone that you like. It's not going to affect the build at all. For the melee, I like Incinerator Snap because I can do the entire full snap and get the ignition off a lot faster than Celestial Fire, even though Celestial Fire has a little bit better range. And then for the grenade, I'm going with the Healing Grenade. And the reason for that is because my second aspect, Touch of Flame, which is going to improve my Healing Grenade. The main thing is that it takes it from Restoration ×1 to ×2, which means I get more passive healing. For our fragments, we have to talk about Ember of Empyrean. Solar weapon or ability final blows extend the duration of restoration and radiant effects applied to you. So once I get that restoration ×2 on myself from the healing grenade, as long as I get those solar weapon or ability final blows, I can have that passive healing up for a very long time. The way we're going to get radiant is from the artifact, which I will talk about that later. Next, Ember of Singeing. Your class ability recharges faster when you scorch targets, which means we can have Phoenix Dive more, which means we can have the Hellion more often. Next, Ember of Ashes. You apply more scorch stacks to targets. Note, I did have this on with the Hellion for the video you saw previously with the Colossus, but again, this one's going to be really good so you can cause more ignitions. And then the last one, I personally like Ember of Solace, so the radiant and restoration effects applied to you have an increased duration. If you didn't want to do Ember of Solace, you could still do Ember of Torches to get radiant whenever you hit a target with a powered melee attack, but like I said, you don't necessarily need this one. You could do Ember of Char, so your solar ignitions will spread Scorch to affected targets. It is a +10 to the grenade stat, which is nice. Or you could potentially do Ember of Searing. Defeating scorched targets grants melee energy and creates a fire sprite, and it gives a +10 to class. And again, whenever you pick up a fire sprite, it gives you grenade energy back. Column number 1 is the weapon champion mods, and you can use what you like. Personally, I'm just doing the Anti-Barrier Scout and Pulse, Unstoppable Sidearm and Hand Cannon, and then Overload Rapid Fire, which includes autos and submachine guns. Column number 2, I have Flame, Fiber, and Freeze, which gives you the Solar Strand and Solar Stasis Siphon mods, which I am going to be using in this setup. And then I'm also using one with Frost. So while Frost Armor is active, Stasis weapons gain increased reload speed and stability. Stasis swords gain increased guard resistance. You're like, Dave, how are we going to get Frost Armor on the Solar subclass? Well, that's where Fever and Chill comes into play. Rapid precision hits with solar weapons grant Radiant, and if you do the same thing with Stasis weapons, it grants Frost Armor. What's really cool is that what it doesn't mention is that as long as you get rapid final blows with these weapon types, it will still apply Radiant and Frost Armor. So we will have a solar and stasis weapon with this setup. After that, if I'm with the team, I'll do Elemental Benevolence. So granting allies an elemental buff gives you class ability energy, which means I can get that Phoenix Dive back faster, or I just do Frost Renewal, which is another bonus to the Frost Armor. It's not as cool as this one, but you might as well have it on. Lastly, in third column, Refresh Threads. Picking up an elemental pickup, matching your subclass element or a tangle. If you're on Strand, grants energy to your least charged ability. In column number 4, I like Cauterized Darkness, so Stasis and Strand debuff non-boss combatants take increased solar damage from all sources. Then Elemental Coalescence. Defeating targets has a chance to create an elemental pickup matching your equipped super element, which kind of goes hand in hand with Refresh Threads. If you didn't want to use one of these, you could do Elemental Daze if you are dealing with champions. In the final column, Radiant Shrapnel is fantastic, so dealing sustained weapon damage while radiant or defeating a Scorch combatant with a weapon causes the target to release solar projectiles that deal damage and Scorch on impact, which means you basically have an extra mini Scorch pile that attacks targets, which means you can Scorch them more often, proc more abilities, and cause more ignitions. For your last options, I personally like Shield Crush, so when you have Woven Mail, Frost Armor, or a Void Overshield, your melee recharges faster and deals increased damage. Same thing with the Grenade, but you have to be Amplified or Radiant. The only other option would be Elemental Overdrive, so picking up an Elemental Pickup or Tangle grants increased damage to weapons of that same element type. So since we're on Solar, if we pick up a Fire Sprite, our Solar weapons gain a bonus. For your weapon options, what's really cool is that you're not tied down to really anything. As long as you have a stasis weapon and a solar weapon, you're pretty much good to go. For me, I'm still using Tanasha's Mastery as my stasis special weapon. This thing is great. It has chill clip on it. I really cannot complain. Even the new fusion rifle, you can get the Lionfish 4FR. I have Reservoir Burst, which means as long as I get a kill and everything explodes around it, I can get a multi-kill and get the Frost Armor just from these weapons here. But again, if you have a primary weapon you want to use here, that's totally fine as well. Same thing with energy weapons. I just got this decent roll on the Ahab char here with Heal Clip and Burning Ambition, which is the new Incandescent perk essentially. So dealing sustained damage more quickly scorches the target, dealing damage to a Scorch target, inflicts Scorch, which is pretty nice. But like I said, any solar weapon will work here. Solar primaries, you have that. If you have solar secondaries, again, the Aberrant Action from Echoes. I have Heal Clip and Incan. I even got a roll of the Raid Fusion Rifle with Controlled Burst, so this thing could be decent for DPS potentially. But again, any solar weapon is going to work here because once you get the Restoration ×2 and the Radiant, as long as you continue getting solar weapon or ability final blows, remember, you keep up Restoration and Radiant pretty much indefinitely as long as there's ads to kill. And for our heavy weapons, like I said, you can use whatever you like as long as you have a good PvE DPS roll that you want to use for something. That's totally cool. It does help if it matches solar and stasis, so when we match it up to our armor mods, that will help a lot. Before we dive into the armor mods, we need to talk about the new stat system and what stats you want to use for the setup. There are two main stats to focus on. The first one being class, so we have the fastest class ability energy at 100, but if you go over 100, whenever you use your class ability, you will get an overshield, which if you're doing tougher activities, that could come in clutch. The second one is weapons. So you at least want 100 so you can get the 10% reload and handling percentage increase and then the 15% damage increase. But if you go over 100, this is the enhanced benefit. Ammo bricks from defeated targets have a chance to contain additional rounds and increases weapon damage against bosses and opposing guardians. The main thing here is that extra boss damage and extra ammo. The only other stats to make sure you have high would be grenade, which means you have the fastest cooldown for it. On the solar one, you don't need to go over because the healing grenade isn't going to damage targets. And with the super, again, if you're using Well of Radiance, we just want a fast cooldown. That super in and of itself isn't really going to deal a lot of damage. So if you can get it up to 100, that would be great. Now, going over the armor mods on my helmet, I'm going with the Thermodynamic Siphon. So if I get those rapid solar and stasis weapon final blows, it'll create an orbit power. Again, you get this from the artifact. Next, heavy ammo finder. Increase the effect of all contributions toward the heavy ammo meter. I want more heavy so I can do more DPS and all that. And then for the last one, I just put on Radiant Light if I'm with a team, or you could do Powerful Friends. On my gauntlets, I'm doing double impact induction, so when I cause damage with my powered melee, it gives me a grenade cooldown. And then last one, I like Grenade Font. So armor charges have not changed. So when you collect an orb of power, it'll give you an armor charge that will last 10 seconds. With the grenade font, as long as I have the armor charge, I get a plus 32 my grenade stat with one of these on, which takes my 76 up to 106, which means I at least have the max cooldown for my grenade. For the chest piece, I'm using harmonic ammo generation, which translates to solar, so I get increased ammo generation for those solar weapons. Again, I just mainly match it around my heavy weapon so I can have more ammo for it, which is nice. And then I have Arc and Void Resist, but honestly, you can use whatever resistance mods that you'd like depending on what activity you're doing. On my boots, I'm rocking Recuperation, which replenishes health each time I pick up an Orb of Power, which if you have a high enough health stat, you don't need this. You could just do triple Weapon Surge. In my case, I'm doing Solar Weapon Surge for my Solar Heavy weapon. Again, if you are going to be using a Stasis weapon or whatever weapon that you like, again, just match it up to that element type for that extra damage. But essentially, as long as you have an armor charge, you gain a bonus to those damage types. And the more that you have, the more damage that you do. If you want to do triple and get rid of Recuperation entirely, you can totally do so. Then lastly, on my class item, I'm rocking Time Dilation. So your decaying armor charge has a longer duration. So that 10 seconds that I mentioned with one armor charge gets bumped up to 15 seconds. You can have a max of 3, which means we have armor charge at full for 45 seconds. And then Reaper, shortly after using my class ability, your next weapon final blow spawns an orb of power. That one's very nice. And then Bomber reduces my grenade cooldown when I use my class ability. Now let's talk about the Prismatic Warlock setup. So for my super, I'm personally going with Needle Storm. Now obviously this is good for DPS, but there is also another reason why I'm using the Strand super for this. For my abilities, I'm going with Phoenix Dive again, but you could use Healing Rift if you'd like. Again, Burst Glide, you can use whatever movement you like. For the melee, I like Arcane Needle because you get 3 of them and it can cause Unravel, which means when you kill that target, it will spawn a Tangle, which is going to be important. And then for the grenade, I personally like Vortex, which is going to pull a lot of adds in, but you could potentially do Cold Snap for the crowd control as well. For aspects, obviously, we need the Hellion to get the bonus from the exotic, but the next one is going to be Feed the Void. So defeat a target with any ability to activate Devour. Your Devour effects are improved, restoring additional health and grenade energy. Essentially, once you defeat a target, any final blow you get within the 10-second timer is going to restore you to full health, grant grenade energy, and extend Devour. This is extremely good for survivability and crowd control. For fragments, there are a multitude of them, so if there's something that you like using, definitely let me know, but these are the 4 that I settled on. First up, Facet of Hope. While you have any elemental buff, your class ability regenerates more quickly. Again, it's going to be good to have that Phoenix Dive more often, so we can have the Hellion up all the time. Next, Facet of Solitude. Landing rapid precision hits emits a severing blast from the target. While Transcendent, the severing blast is bigger. The main thing here is causing severing, which is going to take the target's DPS down, but also if you defeat that target, it will turn into a Tangle. Next, Faster Protection. While surrounded by combatants, you are more resistant to incoming damage. While Transcendent, the effect is increased and is a +10 to the melee stat. Then lastly, Facet of Purpose. This is the big one. So picking up an Orb of Power is going to give you a buff depending on what super you're using. In this case, we have the Strand super, which means we're going to get Woven Mail, which again is extra damage resistance. And here are the artifact perks that I'm using for the Prismatic Warlock. In the first column, I'm using the same weapon champion mods. I'm also using Flame Fiber and Freeze again, but now in the second column, I'm using Tightly Woven. So while Woven Mail is active, gain increased class ability and grenade stats. In the third column, I'm still using Fever and Chill mainly to get the Radiant prog. I'm not necessarily going for the Frost Armor one this time around because I can have Woven Mail. Again, I still have Refresh Threads. I'm also still using Cauterized Darkness and Elemental Coalescence, but now I have Threaded Blast. So destroying a Tangle with strand damage increases the radius of the explosion and its damage. And its explosion is insane and can also proc Devour, which is very nice. And in the final column, I'm still going with Radiant Shrapnel and Shield Crush. These two are very good with the setup. For our weapons, it's practically the same as the solar setup. The only difference here really is that I'm using a strand in the primary. I have this Mint Retrograde here, which is pretty nice. It could have some better perks on it, but this thing is extremely powerful. Even then, I do like using Barrow Diet as well. This thing just absolutely cooks. Any adds, any bosses, it's fantastic. Plus, using these weapons to shoot that Tangle and causing that explosion is very nice. And then, like I said, for your energy weapon, I'm just using a solar weapon so I can proc Fever and Chill to get the Radiant buff, which is what I like. So again, use your favorite solar weapon. Doesn't really matter what you use. I would recommend a primary if you are using a special in the kinetic slot. And then again, for your heavy, just use your favorite PvE heavy weapon. For armor mods, I'm still using Heavy Ammo Finder and Radiant Light or Powerful Friends, but I switched out Thermodynamic for the Solar and Strand Dual Siphon mod, so those Rapid Solar Weapon and Strand Weapon Final Blows will create Orbs of Power for me. On my gauntlets, I'm using Bolstering Detonation and Focusing Strike, so when I deal damage with my Power Grenade or my Power Melee, it's going to give me Class Ability Energy. Then lastly, Momentum Transfer, causing damage with a grenade reduces your melee cooldown. On the chest piece, I'm doing the same thing. I have my solar ammo generation with 2 resistance mods, but again, you can switch these out depending on what weapons you are using. On the boots, I'm still using the same thing, 1 recuperation with 2 solar weapon surges. Again, make sure the weapon surges match up with the heavy weapon that you're using so you can get some extra damage out of it. If you still want to do triple weapon surge, that is totally fine as well. And on my class item, I'm still using Time Dilation, Reaper, and then I'm using Outreach this time, so when I use my class ability, it reduces my melee cooldown. One of the other changes with the new armor is that we have armor archetypes that have a primary and a secondary stat, and then also a chance to have a small third stat bonus. So what types of armor archetypes should you be focusing on? First up, I would definitely look at Gunner because this is where you're going to get the weapon as the primary, grenade as the secondary. Next up would be Specialist, where you get class as the primary and weapons as the secondary. Another change to armor in the Edge of Fate is set bonuses, where you can have a 2 and 4 piece, which is going to give you certain buffs. Now, there are a bunch of different ones, and again, it's a little more for the end game because, again, you're working your way up to good armor that you actually want to keep. So the low armor, you're probably not going to want to keep. So what set bonuses should you go for with the Eunoia build? One set I recommend is either 2 or 4 piece Bushido, which you can get from the Pinnacle Ops activities. At 2 pieces, final blows with freshly drawn or reloaded weapons heal you, and at 4 pieces, bow, shotgun, or sword final blows temporarily reduce incoming damage. Damaging targets with those weapons extends the effect. Another set would be Last Discipline, which you can get from the Vanguard Arms rewards. At 2 pieces, final blows with primary ammo weapons gives those weapons a temporarily increased reload speed, and at 4 pieces, picking up an orb of power grants special ammo progress. If you're doing a little more endgame, the Collective Psyche set from the Desert Perpetual raid is pretty good. At 2 pieces, picking up an ammo brick gives you a stacking bonus to weapon swap and stow speeds until you die, and at 4 pieces, suspend, unravel, and sever effects applied to targets, which is mainly going to be for Prismatic. But the second part, Radiant and Restoration effects applied to you have increased duration. The 2-piece set bonus of Twofold Crown from Trials of Osiris is decent, so picking up an ammo brick heals you. Again, just a really general bonus there. We also got to look into what the Solstice armor set bonuses are going to be, and it's called Lustrious. So at 2 pieces, receiving healing temporarily grants your solar weapons increased flinch resistance, handling, and reload speed, and at 4 pieces, rapid solar final blows heal you, which is going to be good with both the solar and the prismatic setup for Eunoia. Now that we covered both subclasses, what artifact perks you want to use, your weapon options, and everything that goes on under the new Armor 3.0, which is a lot. Now I can dive into a little bit on how each build works and what I like about it. Benefits of the build. Number 1, if you don't want to think, Hellion is obviously extremely easy to use. Use your class ability and it's going to automatically attack those targets. If you're on the Solar subclass and you have your Restoration ×2 and your Radiant, being able to have the Hellion just passively kill enemies or even just build up these Scorch stacks to cause Ignition to, wipe out a whole area of enemies will allow you to keep up that survivability. Same thing on the Prismatic side of it. Whether you get an ability kill with the Hellion or not, being able to have the passive damage from it, being able to keep up Devour, getting your grenades back faster, essentially have really good ability spam is very nice. Number 2, even though the passive damage you get from it isn't crazy, being able to have that extra DPS option without having to stop your line of fire from whatever weapon you're using is very nice. Obviously, things like Starfire Protocol are really good for spamming that fusion grenade and getting a lot of damage in, but if you need to be using a weapon constantly, something like Outbreak Perfected, for example, especially if you're doing the new raid, being able to have this passive Scorch and Ignition from your Hellion is really nice. And lastly, number 3, it is a new player-friendly exotic in my opinion. Being able to just pop your class ability and have the Hellion just attack targets is extremely easy. Some builds require so much setup that half the time it's not even worth having to go through all the trouble to consume a grenade, do a Phoenix dive, spin around 6 times or whatever you have to do. Again, not all exotics are that complicated, but I'm just saying for an exotic that gives decent passive damage and works on both the solar and the prismatic setup, it's decent. But that, ladies and gentlemen, are my Eunoia, Solar, and Prismatic Warlock builds. If you want to test these builds out for yourself, I provide the dim links in the description. So if you want to copy everything that I'm using, down to the subclass, the artifact perks, the weapons, the armor mods, and even the drip if you like, again, go test out for yourself and let me know what you guys think. Again, like I mentioned, this isn't the best PvE Warlock exotic, but if you have a setup that you like using and something different that you used on your Eunoia setup, definitely let me know in the comments. There are multiple different ways to set up this build. This is just something that I came to here in the early game, so if I come up with a way better one for the end game, I will definitely be making another video. In any event, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to drop a like on it, subscribe to the channel, and turn on that bell next to notifications so you don't miss out on any other Destiny 2 builds I'm dropping here on the channel. If you didn't know, we live stream here on YouTube and over on Twitch and TikTok. Again, all those links will be in the description. If we're playing Destiny 2, we're mainly going to be power grinding. We can do carries for the new Desert Perpetual raid. Honestly, once you understand the mechanics, it's really simple. The raid is quite fun. So if you do want to hop in, again, say something in the chat, or if you want to be proactive, join my Discord. We're starting to build up the D2 LFG community a little bit more, and I also have my own clan as well. But we also have people talking about other games in there and other topics like tech and anime as well. Lastly, if you want to help support the channel even more, you can look into becoming a member. Now, if you don't know what a membership is, it's essentially like a Twitch subscription, but it does cost less on YouTube. You're going to get exclusive emotes, monthly badges, and the big thing, early access to all of my long form videos. So if you would like more information, all you have to do is press the join button next subscribe, and that will give you a rundown with all the details you need. All right, ladies and gentlemen, it's been your boy. We'll catch you in the next video.